Hello, I'm Judith Panero, Executive Director for AAMC and AAMC Foundation. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's virtual discussion. We hope that you, our community of colleagues, allies, and supporters around the globe are healthy and safe. Our offices are in New York, and today I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, location situated upon the unceded seized territory of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples, and benefited from the economies of slavery and labors of African-descended captives. We owe our existence and vitality to generations from around the world who were brought here against their will, drawn here to escape persecution, and some that have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We pay respect to their communities past and present. This acknowledgement asks us each to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. The systemic violence and racism targeted at Black, Indigenous, and people of color is a harsh reminder of the inequities that persist in our society, particularly by the very institutions meant to protect them. AAMC condemns all violence, bias, aggression, and discrimination based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and religion. It is important to listen and learn together, and to also take action to make change a reality. AAMC's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access will continue to be a driving force of all our efforts. We call upon cultural organizations and the individuals working, funding, and serving them to take action to do better. We are dedicated to an environment in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity at our programs. Each individual has the right to be in a professional atmosphere that prohibits discriminatory practices, including harassment. Our full code of conduct policy for this webinar and all our programs, as well as the outlets to make direct or anonymous report of violation, has been posted in the chat feature. For many years, we have been presenting virtual programming and documenting live events, all of which are accessible on our website at artcurators.org or our YouTube channel. We hope they provide actionable advice, value, and connectivity. You can also stay up to date on our programming by registering for our communications. We are grateful to all our attendees for making space in their schedule to join us. I also want to acknowledge our members here today and express our gratitude to them for their dedication in being part of our community. We give thanks to our speakers for sharing their experiences and knowledge in today's candid and open forum. Thank you again for joining us. And now to begin our program.
Thank you so much. So my name is Stephen Milbauer, and I am a vice president here at Koya Partners here in New York City. And I want to thank, at the outset, Judith Panero and Monica Valenzuela for inviting us to participate in this session on finding your next role and positioning yourself in order to really make impact in the cultural arts space. So thank you so much for inviting us and for allowing us this time. What I'd like to now do is I'd like to share my screen where I will go through a presentation deck, and then we will open it up to the Q&A. And so do feel free to raise questions, as we'd like this very much to be a conversation and a dialogue throughout this conversation. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And can everyone see the screen? Great. So a view from the hiring side. If you have partnered with an executive recruiter before, or if you have not partnered with an executive recruiter, let me just tell you a little bit about Koya Partners. Koya Partners is a virtual firm. We've been around for about 16 years, started by a woman named Katie Bouton in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and we only serve mission-oriented clients. I've been at Koya now for a little more than 3 years. I'm based in New York City. I live 2 blocks from the Whitney Museum, as well as the High Line on the west side of Manhattan. And I've been in the executive search world for the last 13 years. In the last 11, particularly focused on serving academic and municipal museums in the full senior leadership suite. I've worked with clients very small to very large across the country, both art museums, history museums, science museums, and I've worked in curatorial positions, deputy director level positions, director level and CEO level positions, as well as in other functional areas, including development, marketing, communications, as well as as well as education roles. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over just very quickly to my colleague, Tenley Bank, to introduce herself, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm working with Stephen on a number of searches in the art museum world. I came to Koya last January to join the team with Stephen and his colleague, Mary Viner, from Korn Ferry, which is a large global firm where I was in the higher education practice. And so I've been working on a number of curatorial searches as well as other searches in the arts and culture space over the past year plus. Thank you.
Thanks, Tenley. So partnering with an executive recruiter. So as a retained search firm, we are hired by clients. And by that, we are the conduit between the talent, so those of you in the field that are looking for potential opportunities, as well as meeting the needs of our client. And we speak with our client and learn as much as we can about the opportunity, and then we draft a position profile. That becomes the blueprint by which we have identified what are the key competencies and qualities. And then we begin to use that as a means to go into the market and have discussions with potential connectors as well as prospective candidates. And so we very much are about relationship building, and we liken ourselves to matchmaking. When we are looking at opportunities, some of the select posting sites that we use to raise the profile of the opportunity and cast the net far and wide include the American Alliance of Museums, the Association of Art Museum Curators, the Association of Art Museum Directors, the Association of Academic and Municipal Galleries, Museum Galleries, and Museum Hue, which is a platform that focuses on earlier or emerging professionals for Black and Indigenous and other people of color. So wanted to include those sites just for you to think about means by which you might begin to apply for positions or look for opportunities for your next move. We're going to focus this conversation on how best to present yourself when applying for a position. So we're going to talk about resume, best-in-class practices, your online profile, including LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and then your online presence. Just some statistics. So according to a Hewlett-Packard internal report, men apply for a job when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, but women apply only if they meet 100% of them. What does that mean? It means that in our eyes, you should feel free to apply for as many positions as you feel qualified for. And even if you don't necessarily feel as though you meet all the qualifications, let us discern whether or not you have the capabilities or demonstrated track record to lead in those particular opportunities. So we say go for it. According to research, more than 77% of recruiters use online profiles and social media to recruit talent, and 20% use it to learn more about candidates. So focused on your resume, it should be easy to read and follow with ample breaks and white space. Proofread, proofread, proofread. I can't tell you how many resumes we come across where there are typos, where there are structural issues, where there are run-on sentences. So really make sure that it's tight. Be sure to list your contact information. How would a hiring manager or recruiter reach you? Include your phone, your email, and your address or location. And tailor your organization for which you are most interested. If it's an academic museum, you'll most likely want to make sure that your CV includes all of your scholarship, all of your publications, all of the work that you have amassed throughout your career, versus a municipal setting where it may be that you want to have a tightened, more short resume where you include more of your administrative capabilities and then perhaps include an addendum of all of your exhibitions, your publications, and the like. I've included a link to best practices for developing your museum resume that was found on the College Art Association website. And by the way, we will include this deck. We've sent it along to Monica Valenzuela, so she will be happy to share it with you if you'd like, so do feel free to reach out to her. Do your homework. Learn as much as you can about the organization. Be sure to take the time to match the skills, the organization is seeking with your skill set, and then highlight the most relevant skills in your resume. More specifically, don't just list the scope of your responsibilities. Rather, be specific on what you accomplished throughout your career. Own what you have achieved, but don't inflate your contributions. Be sure to add metrics, your overall organizational staff size, operating budget, staff and budget oversight under your purview, funds including private donors, corporate foundations and grants, and gifts you've brought in. If you've not held a leadership role directly supervising a team, find ways to highlight how you have managed by influence. It's really important. As I was looking at the list of attendees, some of you are very earlier in your career and some of you are a bit more seasoned. And so it may be that you're not directly supervising a team right now, but what are the ways in which you have worked across other departments, worked with other collaborators and partners to engage in projects or initiatives? And that's what we mean when we talk about managing by influence. When we are drafting the position profile, this blueprint or marketing tool, some of the key competencies that we are evaluating for senior leadership roles include your leadership and management capabilities, your exhibitions and programs for different audiences, your fundraising, your friend-raising, recognitions and awards, the role of a museum today in this moment of reckoning around diversity, equity, inclusion, access, and belonging, board, committee service, and scholarship. So when you're drafting your resume, think about the ways in which you have engaged in any of these competencies or all of these competencies, and make sure you really do put down some of the finer points, again, not just the scope of your responsibility, but some of the key accomplishments. And that will make you a more compelling and attractive candidate as we are looking for opportunities. As we turn to your online profile and thinking about LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, create a headline that describes you well and sets you apart. Never leave a profile incomplete, as it's a turnoff and an unused opportunity. I can't tell you the number of LinkedIn profiles that we will look at where it just has your title and your organization and maybe your chronology, but there's not enough meat to the bone. So you want to make sure that you have really fully fleshed out your profiles as well. Don't use selfies unless it's tasteful, and photographs that cast you with poor lighting. Be careful about the kind of photos you post. You don't want your parents to see it. It's probably not suited for a potential employer's eyes. Review your privacy settings. So for example, Facebook sometimes automatically enables visitors to see tagged photos of you. So double check your settings to remove this. Craft a concise and impactful summary that illustrates your overall capabilities. And be sure to add your peers, your classmates, your workmates, alumni, your managers for whom you've worked within different organizations. It's a great way to get your brand, your profile, and your name out there. As you think about your online presence, understand what others are seeing about you. So Google yourself. Really important. You want to make sure that what is out there is what you want it to be. Your Zoom presence. I think it's important to curate your environment to welcome people into your lives. It can be a conversational starter. So as an example, I have a painting on my back wall, and the number of people that comment on it is it's a great icebreaker. It's a great way to begin the conversation. But be careful in the use of virtual backgrounds, as it could be distracting. Initiate and engage in relevant conversations on social media forums. Reach out to organizations you admire or wish to be a part of, and express an interest in conducting an informational interview. These are easy ways to network and amplify your visibility among recruiters and hiring managers. Know what's happening in the museum field. Stay updated on the latest trends and relevant topics, issues, and share that information with your opinion on your social media profiles for personal branding. Some of the blogs that I follow include Art Daily, ArtNet, Art Forum, and Art News. I think it's helpful for me to understand what's happening in the field, what are some of the emerging issues. Change the museum on Instagram is another way to keep a pulse on what's happening, particularly in this moment of DE&I and the focus on social equity and racial justice. Be careful what you post on social media. As much as it is your right to post whatever you want on your page, others can use this information against you. If you don't want to lose the opportunity of landing your dream job, be as responsible as you can when posting photos, news, and comments. Cleaning up content that doesn't promote personal professionalism is a great starting point of a long and prosperous career. However, don't be afraid to align your public presentation with your values. Stay true to who you are. Be authentic. And then I included a bio of myself, and my contact information is included. Do feel free to reach out to me if you are looking for a new opportunity or if you have questions about your own professional growth and career path forward. I'm happy to make time to speak with you. So I'm going to now stop sharing my screen. So at this point, I would open it up to any questions that come in through the Q&A functionality, and do feel free, want to hear from you. If there are things in particular either that I've raised in my presentation and or the things that you're thinking about, either as you are moving through your career path, or maybe you are further along in your career path and you're looking for a new opportunity, we would welcome them. Tenley, are there any questions that have come in?
Oh, not yet. Am I still muted?
No.
I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, here we go. I'm not on social media with the exception of LinkedIn by design. Is it okay to stay off of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's another way to get your name out there, to push your brand, to have the course of discussion around what are the topics and what are the emerging trends that are happening in the field. I think it's just a good way for you to keep anchored in the discussion and the discourse that's happening in museums today. So I would say if you're not on social media, maybe don't use it on a regular basis, but be sure to get engaged in some of those conversations. I think it will help just to elevate your own profile and your networking, particularly in this moment of COVID, as we're not able to travel and not have those face-to-face meetings with folks. I think it's just another way to begin to engage and build strong relationships with others in the field.
And this is related. Are there particular social media platforms or online programs that are better than others?
I would say that, certainly Facebook can be a very good tool. I think that LinkedIn obviously is a very good tool in terms of positioning yourself for opportunities, looking for other connectors. As you look at your own profile, or if you're looking at another individual's profile, for instance, on LinkedIn, you'll notice who they're connected to on the right-hand side. I think it's just another good way for you to continue to build out your relationship and your body of networks. So I think that those are probably two that I would encourage you to take a look.
And for a seasoned professional with 25 years of experience, how far back should your CV or resume go?
Oh, include it all. Some people say the rule of 2 to 3 pages, nonsense, or at least in our experience, nonsense. I would say that it's important that you really flesh out your capabilities, particularly if you are senior, or if you are more seasoned in your career path, and maybe you are, let's say, a senior curator or a deputy director, and you may be looking for an even greater senior leadership role. As an example, a director of museum. We want to see all your capabilities. So again, looking back at those key competencies, we want to look at the teams that you've managed. We want to look at the role that you played in strategic planning. We want to think about the ways in which you have encouraged relationships with high net worth donors, thinking about gifts of art that you have cultivated and collected, building ties to your community. So I would include as much to make it as rich and robust as possible, because it will only make you a more compelling and likely candidate for consideration.
And how might a resume come across if a person was in a position only a year and a half, 2 or 3 years? Would they seem like a flight risk, etc.? What if this was the case for multiple positions?
So we call them job hoppers. What I would say is that if you are earlier in your career, that we would most likely see those moves, right? Because you are trying to advance your skill set, you're trying to engage in further development. If you are further along in your career and you are moving every 2 years, that gives us pause because again, we do see that as a flight risk. We also want to ensure that our candidates are set up to succeed and that the organization is not going to have to re-engage in a search a year later or 2 years later. So if you find that there is a pattern in your resume, and there may be certain circumstances that you found that you had to move, perhaps it was a spouse that relocated to another community, those things you want to make sure to highlight, maybe in a letter of interest or in the conversation that you would have with a hiring manager or recruiter. But you do want to, what we call, have stick to it in this. So I would say at least 3 to 5 years in an organization. Anything beyond that is even greater value.
And as far as including putting a location on a CV, a number of questions coming through. If you're including your email and phone number, how important is it to include your location on a CV or resume?
I think it's just helpful to have understanding of context. So as an example, if we are looking at a position, as an example, right now, we are looking for the chair of education for the Whitney Museum of Art. One thing that's important is that we, in this moment of COVID, we want to know whether or not you are in a position to make a move, that you are open to relocation, or maybe you have ties to the community. So I think including your location can be very helpful in understanding context as a hiring manager and or recruiter. It's not one by which we would eliminate a candidate, but it does help us in understanding the finer nuance points of your experience.
And here's one. I have worked for 3 biennials, but would like to move to the museum world. It's been very difficult as museums like museum experience. Any advice for making the transition?
One of the things that we look for is, again, we look for capabilities. I think that one of the things that people find is that if I don't put it down on paper, then it will reflect poorly. I think it is important to put things down on paper. At the same time, as we think about ensuring that we are casting the net far and wide and that we are looking for a diverse pool of candidates for our clients' consideration, particularly BIPOC leaders, one thing that we talk about with our clients is that we have to be more flexible in terms of scaffolding or providing support for this person. So as an example, if someone is a visionary and they've really cast a very strong curatorial viewpoint with respect to strategic efforts or growing the programs, I think it's important to reflect that, because we will say to our client, this is someone who's got really good vision. This is someone who has grown programs, who has grown engagement with the community, but here are the areas in which there would be a learning curve, and what is your appetite for enabling this person with the right support to grow into that role. So I would say that even though you haven't necessarily had direct museum experience, I think it's important just to reflect as many skills and capabilities that you have that you believe could be translatable in a museum setting, and then let the hiring manager and or the executive recruiter discern whether or not there is worth a consideration and a conversation.
I'm in the process of applying for jobs at the senior level, though many of the jobs I'm seeing are at the assistant/associate level. My museum has moved in this direction when replacing senior people to save money. Is it worthwhile to apply below your level and hope that museums will spend the extra money on your value? If not, what recommendations do you have for people at a more senior level who see fewer senior level jobs?
So here's what I would suggest. I would say, put yourself out there. I do think that there are opportunities for organizations to rescope roles, departments, divisions, and particularly as institutions, art museums in particular, are thinking about the role that they play in serving the community. I think that there are opportunities for you to think beyond a position profile and or your own skills. I think that it would be important for you to think about whether or not there is an opportunity for you to engage in perhaps, let's say, an associate director level position. And if you demonstrate to the client that you have greater capabilities, they may elevate your role. Maybe it would be a year out from now. So I would say, don't limit yourself just to titles, because there's a lot of reorganizationing happening.
Let's see. You just answered a question about moving too often. What if you have been at the same place for a very long time? Is that valued or seen as a lack of flexibility?
Often there is the trade-off, right? So you don't want to be seen as a job hopper. At the same time, you don't want to be seen as a lifer. I do think it shows commitment, as long as you have demonstrated growth in different roles within the organization, and that you position yourself as someone who can be malleable and flexible and nimble. I think it's important that you demonstrate throughout your resume or your CV the ways in which you have flexed innovation, the ways in which you have worked with other cutting edge ideas, or worked with other departments to infuse or implement, lead, and build new programs that maybe were not part of the ecosystem of your own organization.
And this is another one on that same theme. How do you balance your resume, making you seem like a job hopper moving every 1 to 2 years, with the trend that many museum and postdocs or fellowships for emerging professionals are short-term contingent opportunities?
Reflect that. Make sure that in your CV that you have the chronology, and maybe you indicate, that this was a 2-year contract, because rather than leaving it open to one to make assumptions, put it out there, right? To say I came in because we received a Mellon grant or a grant from the Ford Foundation to really develop a program around DE&I, or a new initiative around technology or the use of innovation. So I think it's important that you reflect and be honest about your career path and your career trajectory, but also ensure that you are really putting down on paper the things that you did within even that short amount of time.
And do you feel like personal websites are becoming more expected for museum professionals?
I don't think it's expected, but I certainly think that it's another way to ensure that you're getting your profile out there, particularly if you are, for instance, a practicing artist. I've noticed that there are folks who have their work, on their own website, or exhibitions that they've engaged. So make sure to include your own personal website when you're including your email address at the top of your resume or your CV. It's just another way for you to give more color about your the body of work for which you are presenting.
How common is it to ask for or include a headshot on a resume?
Honestly, I don't think it's good practice. I think that what we are looking for is, we don't want clients to have implicit bias. So we don't want someone to preclude if it is an organization that is a bit earlier in its growth around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's important that you set apart your capabilities and your skills and your experiences first and foremost, and not include your picture.
Would you recommend reaching out to museums inquiring for a curatorial job, even if you don't know whether they have openings? And you can also address reaching out directly to headhunters or recruiters without having them approach you first.
Oh, absolutely. And when I open the conversation around my background, we certainly are open to having conversations with folks who may be earlier in the professional career, and others who may be a bit more seasoned or further along in their career. And when I was talking about informational interviews, I do think that it's bold and being proactive. I think it shows chutzpah, if you will, to reach out to the organizations for which you are most interested, and find someone that you might say, I'd like to just learn a little bit about what you do, or the culture of the organization. I'm interested in perhaps being a part of it. Even if you don't necessarily have an opportunity now, I'd like to be kept on your radar. One of the things that we do here at Koya is that, although we may be speaking with particular candidates about particular opportunities, I'm also identifying down the road, right? So it may be that 3 years down the road, we have, let's say, a deputy director for curatorial affairs, and maybe 3 years ago we were talking to a senior curator, I will go back to my team and say, remember that person that we spoke to? I think that he, she, they have a lot of capabilities. They might be interesting given what we know about the organization and the opportunity at this moment.
Some areas you mentioned for CV inclusion, like strategic planning or donor relationships or management roles, are not traditionally part of academic CVs. Any advice for making the CV more attuned to museums than academic departments?
Sure. So I would say find a blend between a resume, which includes more of your administrative capabilities and your skills, and then show also the scholarship, your publications, your speaker series, the works that you've done that are really more aligned with an academic institution. Find a hybrid, because I do think that it will enable you to put yourself out there for more than one opportunity.
And this is related. How would you advise promoting experience, such as strategic planning or financial management, that was gained through experience on volunteer boards rather than on the job in the museum?
So when I was talking about board service or community service, I do think it's helpful for you to reflect, and maybe it's in the body of your CV or your resume. So, for instance, if let's say you've been at the High Museum from 2009 to 2014, and then you moved to the Amon Carter in 2014 to present, maybe if you were engaged in a board service between 2010 and 2015, I would include that in between and reflect the work that you've done, either leading capital campaigns, being involved in high net worth donor cultivation, being involved in strategic planning. If you've been, for instance, the president of AAMC or AAM or other organizational or industry-wide sector experiences, I think that those would be very relevant and applicable.
This is sort of a similar related question. An academic CV would prohibit bullet points, but these seem necessary to provide detail beyond title and institution. So should it be a CV resume hybrid? That's actually, you did answer that.
And the other thing I would say, thank you, Tenley. The other thing I would
Sure.
say is we've seen resumes where folks will have a paragraph, right? It's more of a narrative. I would encourage you to put it in bullet forms. It's easier on the eye. It's very clear in terms of the things that you've done, both in terms of the scope of your role, but also the accomplishments. Because what happens is that you then have sort of bleeding of ideas, one to the next. So I would encourage you to frame it more in a bullet format.
What is the best approach to references? Should you always list them on your resume, or just when requested, who should they be?
So we often will say best practices, don't put them on your resume. We don't need it at this point. If you want to list saying that, references upon request, that's fine. When we are doing referencing on candidates for particular roles, whether it's a curator or a deputy director level or a director level, we treat it as a 360. So it's what's called comprehensive referencing. So it would be folks that you have managed, folks that have that you have managed up to or been supervised by, and then peers and colleagues. Really, we want to talk with folks that can talk about specific capabilities that you have, the things that you've done throughout your organization. We usually spend 30 to 45 minutes with the references. We want to get as clear a picture to present to our client to ensure that they have all that they need, both to make a decision, but also to help you in terms of onboarding if offered the position. It's helpful to think about, for instance, if a reference were to say, what they really need is they need a strong administrative assistant, or they need someone to help with calendaring, or they are someone who works 24/7. They need to think about work-life balance. We're going to want to make sure that we raise those issues with our client to ensure that you are set up for success.
How should we handle the request for salary requirements?
Can that person clarify? So here's here's our best. best class recommendation. More and more that we are seeing as we think about social justice and race equity, that we encourage clients to be transparent about a range, or the position is starting at this particular compensation level, or here are the benefits that would be inclusive in that particular opportunity. And so I think it's important that if you are open around compensation, that you say that you're open around compensation. Let us discern through our conversations with you about where the flex point is and what your capabilities, and raise those profiles or those backgrounds with our client and discern whether or not there's enough interest to at least warrant a conversation. You may then self-select out, or the client may say, you know, we're looking for someone who's a bit more senior, or we're looking for someone who's got more of this than that.
Okay, should I explain in my cover letter that I'm moving for spousal reasons and that's part of my motivation in applying for a particular job?
Yeah, I would say, I think be as open and transparent as possible. I would also encourage you to think about why this particular opportunity speaks to you. We have worked with a number of search committees for museum clients whereby someone presents really well, but at the end of the day, what they missed is why they're interested in this opportunity, that they could have been talking to any client at this time. But really think about the ways in which you are interested. What do you know about the organization? Why would this be such an attractive moment for your career? You know, if you are someone who has been around for 5 to 7 years in an organization, you could talk about the fact that you are looking to expand your scope or your scale for an organization, and that this moment that you learned in terms of emerging trends or issues around the focus of serving your community for this particular organization is really attractive to you.
And what advice do you have for curators interested in transitioning into a director role, especially for those with a good deal of experience in mid-sized institutions?
So I would say this, one of the things as a curator that you will be handicapped by is if you haven't played more of a senior leadership role on an institutional level. I would encourage, if you are a curator and you've been in an organization for quite some time, even in a mid-sized or larger institution, to find ways to get involved in strategic planning efforts, to get involved in DE&I, to get involved in engaging with board members or engaging with cultivation and stewardship of donors, because clients are receptive and open to looking at a wide swath of different types of backgrounds, and we want to find the best and most interesting choices for our client. So if we feel as though what you've done from a curatorial or an exhibition or a programmatic perspective is really exciting and dynamic, but you haven't led or managed teams, or you haven't been involved in oversight of budgets, I think that's going to really not be as valuable or position you as highly as candidates who have demonstrated that. So I would find ways to think about bridging and building your skill set on a more institutional level, and really be open to talking with other departments and saying, I understand you're working on X, I'd like to get engaged in some way. Particularly for curatorial and education, often museums find that those two divisions are very siloed, and we encourage our clients to really think about encouraging the relationship between those two parties, because it will only enhance and amplify your reach and your impact.
How can you address gaps in your resume, either intentional family or personal matters, or unintentional, such as unemployment?
I would say be upfront, and it may be that you indicate, took 2 years off to tend to family, or the position was downscaled because of the economy. So I would just be as open and honest as possible, and then if you are able to speak with a recruiter or a hiring manager, you can have that deeper discussion. But what we don't want to, we will ask, what is this gap? What is this 3 years? And it may be that you went back to school to get a more advanced degree. So you just want to reflect your trajectory in a way that is going to be really honest, and also follow a clear path.
I'm 44. Should my CV still include the dates when I received my undergrad and graduate degrees?
I would say yes. I think, again, because one of the things that we will do is that we don't use it to eliminate any candidate, because that would be a bias and that would be illegal. But what we do want is that we do think about conducting degree verifications for all candidates for whom we present to our clients. We want to make sure to check those off when we begin to have you interview with clients. So if you feel that you'd like to include those, that's fine. We want to make sure that at the end of the day that you present yourself in the best way. So I would encourage you just to put it down, because we would ask.
And this is a kind of long question. I'm a woman and my leadership style is very collaborative and communal. I found this method inspires loyalty from staff, but when it comes to museum boards and high-level donors, it seems they often are seduced by the confidence over competence leadership style. I found that senior leadership and boards absolutely want to hire women, but they want women whose personalities and management styles align with more masculine traits. Traits like assertive, firm, logical, aggressive, direct, frank, forceful, analytical. Internal biases incline people to align these qualities with men and think negatively of women who possess these traits. How do qualities like being understanding, helpful, emotionally intelligent become more valued in executive leadership roles? And how do women navigate these biases?
I would say if those are organizations where that is happening, it's probably not the best organization for you. But I would find ways on your resume or in your letter of interest to reflect the fact that you build strong relationships, that you are a collaborative leader, that you really are a good leader manager, that you think through how to encourage collaboration across your organization, across your projects, across the constituents for whom you serve. So I would just say, put it all out there and hope that organizations take a further look at your background.
Sorry. Are there resources to help us to imagine our curatorial projects in the context of metrics? It can be hard to see what you do from an outside perspective, especially when performance reviews are not conducted.
So I think in terms of metrics for a particular exhibition or a project, I would find the ways to think about ensuring that you talk about the number of staff that you brought into if let's say you were leading an exhibition and you ideated the project, think about who are the other parties. Did you work with marketing? Did you work with education? Did you work with advancement and development team to foster bringing in grants, bringing in donors to support the exhibition? Find ways to reflect the budget that you had to manage for that particular project. Think about the ways that you had to get buy-in for your project or your exhibition. What are the ways in which you really fostered strength of leadership and management?
Building on the discussion of skills, can you talk more about how to productively discuss managing via influence? My current title does not reflect my actual accomplishments or position in the larger field. When I am headhunted for more senior level and director level positions, it has been difficult to articulate the gap between my title and level of experience.
So I would say, don't worry about your title. Your title is your title, right? But in the reflected bullets or in the things that you have shown in terms of your demonstrated track, find the ways or talk about the ways in which you have encouraged collaboration and what we call managed by influence. Think about that you, for this particular exhibition or this particular project, that you brought in folks from disparate functions or other areas of the museum, as a means to get your project off the ground and were successful in that completion. Think about the ways that you wrote a grant to underpin your exhibition, and list that to say, I applied for an IMLS grant, or I received one from the NEH or the NEA. Really put those numbers down. I think that will only provide more fodder for strength of your program.
If one has been an independent curator for a number of years and been very active throughout that period, is it more difficult to return to the workplace and obtain a permanent position in a museum?
It is more difficult, but I would say put yourself out there. One of the things that that a recruiter or a hiring manager will ask you is, are you ready to go back and be embedded? Or are you ready to go and be embedded in an organization? As you have been an independent curator, you've had the pick of projects and you've been able to sort of flit about from one organization to another or one project to another. What is your readiness and stick-to-itiveness to being embedded in one organization and be not always having the wherewithal to be able to pick the projects that you want to be engaged in?
Building on the question about salary, what do you do when you are asked what your current salary is? I'm worried that disclosing my current underpaid salary that is not commensurate with my male colleagues would lock me into a lower salary level in a new job and prevent me from moving forward.
So I will say this, it is illegal for us to ask what you make. What we do ask is, what are you hoping for? What are your expectations in your next leadership position? There are, for instance, the state of Colorado now has transparency built into their the foundation of putting positions out there. They have to list what the starting salary and or the band or the range for the compensation, but we cannot ask what you currently make because of the fact that we want to encourage more women and people of color to advance in their careers. So what we're going to be talking about is, what do you bring to the table and what is the appetite and receptivity to our client in looking at someone with your capabilities? When we get further down the road, if we were to make an offer, we would go back to you and say, here's what our client's thinking about. Is that comfortable for you? Or where would you need more stretch or flexibility in terms of benefits, professional development, coaching opportunities, and the like?
And there's two closely related questions. I'll read them both. Can you address the realities of career choices for parents? That is, it might have been harder to move if kids are in school. There might have been an employment gap. You might have had to decline certain travel or late night opportunities due to family obligations. And then the next question is, I wanted to follow up regarding gaps in a resume. As a woman, I would like to balance family and career, but I'm afraid to take a long leave of absence of 2 to 3 years to raise children. Are gaps like this still seen as a negative for hiring committees?
I would say no, they're not a gap. I would say that, you know, if you are someone by which you have now left an organization and you are in the midst of, let's say, a 3 to 5 year gap in your current position, whereby now we are looking to engage, we would want to talk with you about the ways in which you have kept abreast of what are the trends, what are the things that you've done alongside raising your family that have kept you engaged in scholarship, engaged in community service. What are those ways that you've done that? But I would say just be open and honest and transparent, because the last thing you want is you want to reflect a big gap. But you know, we say, you know, put it all out there. We'll have the discussion with you. And because we do want to find whole people, right? We don't want to find just a workhorse. We want to find this person who's going to bring a lot of both hard skills, but also soft qualities that will add value to the culture.
I've always done well getting interviews for curatorial leadership positions when a recruiter is involved. When I'm applying to a job posting, I don't get as many opportunities to interview. Any additional tips on how to break through, whether via CV or cover letter?
So again, some people sometimes will put, you know, lots of applications in. Be a bit more deliberate and targeted in strategic in your thinking, and really tailor your resume, your CV, tailor your letter of interest or your cover letter to that specific organization. Reflect why you're so passionate about that particular, you know, I saw in the news that you were leading this new initiative around, you know, building ties to your community around, you know, embracing more marginalized communities, right? So I would think about the ways that you can anchor your experience and your interests and passions to that particular job. I think that's the only way. And then just to be as open in your materials around the ways in which you have really led, stewarded, and built impact. I think that's going to set you apart from others.
Is it acceptable to send a resume and cover letter directly to the hiring curator director in addition to submitting to whatever HR portal there is? Are there times when you would advise not directly sending materials?
I'm always someone who's like, put it all out there, right? We have received both emails directly to us. We post all of our opportunities on the Koya website. So we try to ensure that we are really casting the net far and wide. But I've had folks who will send their materials directly to me. I'll put them in our proprietary database. It also may be a very quick way for us to engage in a conversation. But I would say, send your material to the client. The last thing that they will do is to say no, right? But if you don't, then I think there's a missed opportunity there.
How much of an inconvenience is it for American institutions to hire non-American citizen curators? Institutions often state that immigration status is not discriminated against, but job postings often ask whether you are authorized to work in the US or will need sponsorship in the future, making it feel like a negative.
So I think that's a really tricky question. I think that it depends on the constraints of the organization. So as an example, I worked with a client whereby they really were constrained by the underwriting of the position. So it was endowed position. So it did not enable us to relocate candidates from even outside the region. So we had a much more focused effort in terms of our outreach efforts. But I would say, put yourself out there. Be open and honest with clients about the need for sponsorship of a visa. But for some organizations where they have a more national and international profile, we encourage our clients to be as open and accessible and inclusive in thinking about stretching the field beyond just our own waters here.
What are some ways in which you recommend building in soft skills into a resume or CV? Is a skills section a good place for that or elsewhere?
Yeah, I would say under skills, for instance, if you want to include some high-level bullets just at the top of your resume or your CV around, high-level emotional intelligence, integrity and ethics, a collaborator, someone who is a good listener, someone who is a strong community advocate and partner. I would find the ways in which you can bring your whole self forward and really put that front and center in addition to some of those hard skills.
Is it okay to apply to more than one job at the same institution at the same time? The jobs are quite different.
I would be a bit more deliberate. So I would not apply for more than two in a particular opportunity. It looks as though you don't have focus around what your capabilities are. Again, it may be, for instance, that you would apply for a curatorial position. You may be applying for a position in education because you've had hybrid experience in those two fields. I think certainly that's appropriate. But if you're applying for 3 or 4, I think what it means is that you are not discerned about what your capabilities are and how you think about your positioning in the organization, how you can add value.
And this question, I'm hopeful you are receptive to receiving information participants on the Zoom. I think in terms of the informational interview, are there specific materials and content, example, what kinds of jobs are we looking for, you would want us to send to you or to other recruiters? And is it okay to cold call recruiters in general?
I would say we have a lot of projects going on, so I would encourage you to send a nice soft email into someone and say, I'm interested in learning more about what you do, right? I'm interested in getting on your radar and thinking about future opportunities. Would love to have just a 15, 30-minute chat with you to think about how I might better position myself for a new opportunity, because we are also building strong relationships. We have a network of connectors and or of other clients and organizations. So we could say, if we know of an opportunity that we're not necessarily working on, we could say, Director X at this particular museum, we just came across someone who we think is just such a rock star, just really interesting, engaging, personable. You may want to consider them for, opportunities should they arise.
Um, I know you work with organizations to try and find the best match, but do you also work with individuals to help them find new positions? It's sort of related.
So I would say that, we are, again, about building strong relationships. So although we are not traditional headhunters in this respect, that we are not finding you a job, that we represent the clients, we also do develop relationships with talent, and we want to be helpful to you if we can. If you're even looking at another opportunity that we're not working on, we're happy to brainstorm with you or be a sounding board. We're also happy to think about you, down the road as opportunities come along, where we would say to our client, we came across this person in the past that we think has a lot of capabilities, really dynamic, sharp. Would you be open to someone who is not necessarily in the visual arts, maybe someone in the performing arts, maybe someone in a history museum? And we found that our clients are a bit more open and want to see kind of a span of different types of interesting profiles.
I don't actually know the answer to this question. Do Koya or do any recruitment work for private collector or family offices, or is the focus strictly on nonprofit cultural institutions?
More of our work is on nonprofit in the art museum space. It's more nonprofit client organizations. I don't think that we work with private collectors. I know that we have had candidates in the past who have worked with collectors and private foundations, but the body of our work is more serving mission-oriented clients.
If a search is still listed on your website as open, even if it was initially posted a month or more ago, should one still reach out and apply if one just saw it? For
Absolutely.
example, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Oh, and sorry, the related question, how long do searches typically take from first posting to actual hiring?
So for more senior level positions, anywhere from 4 to 6 months. That's a pretty standard. So for a director, it's often 5 to 6 months. It could be longer, depending on whether conditions change, depending on COVID, as an example, or other means by which we want to ensure that we've cast the net far and wide, that we have a diverse pool of candidates for clients. For curators, and I've worked on 2 curators with the Minneapolis Institute of Art in the past. Those could be, 3 to 4 months from beginning of developing the position profile and engaging in the search to closing the deal.
If I'm applying,
sorry, Tanley. But I would say, even if the position is still open, put yourself out there, right? Because it may be that we say, oh my God, look at this person who just came forward. Really interesting. I think it would be important for us to bring that forward to our client. It's not done until it's done.
If I'm applying for jobs that would represent a career change from what I've been doing, how much should I narrate that in my cover letter and or resume, in addition to highlighting transferable skills?
I would talk about that. I would put that. I wouldn't put that necessarily in your resume, but I would put that in your cover letter. I think it's important to reflect the fact that, let's say, for the last 10 years, I've been working in a curatorial position, in a small to mid-sized organization. I'm now looking to make a pivot to a foundation or to a grassroots, arts nonprofit, a community-based nonprofit, or even now I'm looking for a director if I'm in let's say a senior curatorial position in a larger organization, but now I'm interested in taking a leadership role as a director for a small organization. Talk about the ways that you would imagine both your transferable skills and why you would be willing to kind of take that step back with respect to scale. I think that will be important.
What are best practices for negotiating a start date, such as if you have a contract at a previous position you'd like to complete before moving positions?
That would be really our job. So often we are asked by clients to both negotiate offer, but to be that sort of bridge between the talent and obviously the client. So all along the way, we're talking about what your salary and compensation expectations are. We're talking about your openness to relocation. We're also talking about sort of when might you be able to make a move to this particular opportunity if you were offered the position. And we'll work with you and our client to be that bridge in terms of thinking through, what's going to be practical. I would say traditionally, 2 to 3 months, in terms of leaving projects behind, because you ultimately want to make sure that your organization for which you are leaving has been set up to success for your for the particular project or initiative that you've been engaged.
For a curator in a mid-level position and for a longer time at a mid-sized museum, what are the top things to do in one's current role to prepare to apply for chief curator positions in the near future?
Again, find ways to both manage by influence and get engaged in projects on an institutional level. I think it, again, boils down to leadership, management, strategy, visioning, one's ability to have the voice of directors, have the voice of patrons, have the voice of community members, but have a strong point of view with respect to your curatorial projects, right? The last thing we want to see for clients is often where someone comes in and talks around projects, but ultimately what clients want is they want someone to bring dynamism, energy, a fresh perspective. Maybe it's not about maintenance mode, but really who's going to help amplify our reach and our impact. So find the ways that you've been able to do that in your curatorial projects that would give credence and credibility to you as stepping into the next leadership role as the chief curator. And Tenley, in fact, is working on a chief curator position, as am I right now. So if you are open to talking with us further, again, you have our contact information. We'd be happy to have an initial conversation with you to sort of think about your interests and your passions.
I don't know how much time we have left, but if opportunities at my own institution are limited and I use freelance curating and writing to expand what I'm able to do, how can I best capture that on a resume?
I would talk about sort of further in your service. So maybe you've been involved in getting involved in regional or national organizations, industry organizations. I would include the ways in which you have fostered your development, fostered the ways that you have engaged in your own personal branding and your profile and your projects. But be as explicit as possible. Again, it's not just your professional career and sort of the growth within one position to the next and one organization to the next, but ensure that you really have put down as much as possible to show your full self.
And then there's a couple.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And unfortunately, I do need to get to another training session. And from the bottom of my heart and from Tenley, we do want to thank you so much. These are great questions. You have our contact information. Happy to follow up with any of you. This is not the end, and we do hope that you are successful in your career and looking for new opportunities. Happy to be a sounding board.
And the rest of the questions are geared around templates for resumes and CVs, resources along those lines. And then also a question, will you cover tips on creating curatorial exhibit portfolio here or in another session? And I think that might be a question back for the conveners with AAMC. And so I'm going to turn it back to you.
Terrific. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Monica to close out the session. But again, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, your investment, your energy, and look forward to hearing greater things to come of your background.
Hello, I'm Monica Valenzuela, Program Manager for AAMC and